feeling that I was collecting a lot of information about how to get better in doing what I do as a Scrum Master. And I would spend hours on preparing various sessions that I needed to run, and specifically retrospectives. And that's how it kind of came to me, and I became more of a retrospective person in the community, because I was spending so much time on preparing my retrospectives because I wanted them to run smoothly, and I looked at them as an opportunity to show how well I'm doing my job as a Scrum Master.
In the largest contribution of much of this quality.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Over the time, I was collecting all this information, and it turned into blog posts and videos, and eventually a product called Retrospective Poker. And over that time, I was able to gather this information. I wanted to share it more because I saw so many people were seeing all the same problems in retrospectives, and I felt that there's a lot of knowledge to be shared so that we can all find ways to make our retrospectives better, because eventually they help us build the right culture, they help us build the right environment in the organizations and in our teams. So that's kind of a quick introduction about me, but so let's talk about why retrospectives and why retrospectives are kind of the most important part of the Scrum framework, at least up to me. If you ask me if I had to cancel every single Scrum event in the sprint but one, I would always keep the retrospective, because I believe that the retrospective is that one formal opportunity for the team to inspect themselves and improve. So a retrospective is there to create continuous improvement, right? The purpose is always to, going back to our agile values, it's an opportunity to look at ourselves and to improve. So if we don't do anything else, at least at the end of every sprint, we would always look at what went wrong or what went well, and think about how can we get better. So eventually we would always get better, not only in how we work, but we would get more working more as a team. So that's why retrospective for me is one of the most important sprint events in general. Now, if the sprint retrospective has such an important purpose, why is that we always see so many troubles with the retrospective? And to think about what are the things that are happening in a retrospective, I want us to spend just a few minutes to actually talk about it and to understand what are the patterns that we're seeing in the retrospectives. And to do that, what I want to do is I have one question for you. And the question is, what's the worst that could happen, right? And I'm pretty sure we all have seen at least one terrible retrospective that we have attended, or we have facilitated, or we heard about, right? So think about that worst retrospective and think about what did it feel like and what was going on. Because we have too many people, unfortunately, we won't be able to actually write down all of the notes right here. But what we will do is in groups of around five people, and I think Shrikant is preparing the breakout rooms, discuss this topic. Because what I want you to see is what are the patterns between the stories you're telling, right? So what we'll do, I'll give you 7 minutes for groups of 5 to talk about that. What are the things that you have seen in those terrible retrospectives? And try to find the patterns between the stories you're telling to each other. And just double checking, Shrikant, do we have the breakout rooms ready?
Yeah, I have the breakout rooms ready. Only thing is, just want to know like how many minutes should be there in the breakout rooms?
So let's say 7 minutes.
Sure.
For groups of 5.
Okay, cool.
Okay. And once we go back, once you come back after the breakout, we'll continue the discussion.
Fine.
Okay.
So we are moving to breakout, guys. Here we go.
I think we still have a couple of people who didn't join.
Yeah, they're still joining.
Yeah.
Uh, Guys, you must be having a notification to join the breakout room, or you must join there.
A tip for the future is that when you create breakout rooms, you can, in settings, say to send people automatically into breakout rooms.
Yeah, so that's what I did. Only thing is that I still see some people.
That's weird. How much time do you have left on the timer?
Your time's
Actually,
up.
I think
Time's up? Okay. Everybody's coming back. Okay. Awesome. Great.
It happened in a jiffy.
Yes, time flies, especially in the breakout rooms in Zoom that
yeah, absolutely.
have
So
to.
this is interesting experience actually. Thanks for that.
So that was an opportunity to discuss, right, the common problems that a lot of us are facing. And the reason for actually doing that is to try to see the patterns. At the end of the day, a lot of the issues that we are facing in retrospectives are quite similar to each other, right? Some would be related to people issues, people not being respectful or not following the Scrum values. Sometimes it's related to other things in terms of the work. And I also looking at some of the questions that have been submitted on Slido, right? Things around people having the same problem and just going over the same things every single time, not being engaged in the retrospective. And another commonality that usually happens in retrospectives is there is no change. As even if action items are created, no one's taking ownership over them, right? Or very often, no action points or improvement actions are created during the retrospective. So in general, I've done many of these webinars, and every time I see similar issues. Almost every time, there are a couple of things that just come up every single time, and most of people have seen those. But when I'm coming back to how I was running my retrospectives as a younger, greener Scrum Master, I always felt that if the retrospective would go well, I would feel really good about myself personally as a Scrum Master. But then if a retrospective would run poorly, I felt that I failed as a Scrum Master. And it wasn't really about the facilitation. And as I started trying to figure out, well, why is that? Why is that I feel that way based on one single meeting that we have with the team? Well, came to me that there is one reality check is when there is an issue with a retrospective, there is usually an issue somewhere else. Retrospective is just this one point where a lot of things are being uncovered. And if there is an issue somewhere outside of the retrospective that impacts the team, whether it's the environment that the team is in or the culture within the team, well, it's the Scrum Master's job to guide the team towards solving the problems, right? So if we look at the retrospective, we can say a retrospective is kind of like performance review for a Scrum Master that they need to do every single sprint. And while retrospective does show us and uncover a lot of the issues, we might need to address them not only in the retrospective, but outside of it as well, right? Now, how do you do that? Obviously, the question is, if there are certain issues, how to address them? And there are certain techniques and ways you can start addressing the issues within the retrospectives that can also create bigger impact outside of them, right? So, and I will give you a chance to ask questions later, but I'll go through the presentation. So if you have questions, do type them in Slido so I can come back to them. I want to come back to things around that we most likely all know, stages of a retrospective. So the book, Agile Retrospectives, a really great book that talks about 5 stages of running a retrospective and gives a lot of different techniques for each one of them. We talk about, we set the stage, we gather an insight, generate insight, deciding what to do, and close, right? When I initially started reading this book, when I was still very new to the role, while it gave so much information around different techniques, I didn't know how to combine them all. And I would still spend a lot of time preparing for every retrospective because I wanted to know how to facilitate it better, right? And while each of those is important and each of those stages of the retrospective can be facilitated in a different way, there's more cohesion if you use specific techniques for a retrospective. Now, what do I mean when I say techniques? Techniques means that it's a generally different approach to running the whole retrospective from start to finish, with a defined focus on specific discussion points, right? So for example, if we look at those icons there, we know that hot air balloon mostly focuses on looking in your past sprint and projecting into the future, right? Looking into what happened, what hindered or helped us, and based on this information in the future, what can help us or hinder us. Versus the sailboat retrospective, well, sailboat kind of uses the same 4-quadrant model, but it focuses on internal factors that help or hinder us versus external factors that help or hinder us, right? Starfish has a completely different focus on specific actions. What should we continue doing, stop doing, right? So each of those techniques focuses on different views on the same problems, right? So we take the same concept of a retrospective and we take the same stages of a retrospective, but the technique, everything that happens in between the beginning and the end of the retrospective is different. And with that, we are able to have more productive discussions and more positive results. For a reason of we allow people to start looking at the same problems they might be having from different angles. And by asking different questions, we might actually have different insights, right? So what does it actually help us resolve when we start using different techniques in the way we run the retrospective? Well, firstly, with new views and new results, we're able to combat the problem of same old boring retrospective with no ideas, right? So when we have a new view on the problems, we can solve this issue that we often see in a retrospective. If you change the question in a retrospective, instead of always asking what went well, what could be improved, to something completely different, as in what external factors impacted us versus what internal factors impacted us. Now the question is different, right? So you have a different view. People don't feel that they are answering the same questions over and over again, and they need to start thinking once again about, well, the question is different, so my answer should be different, right? The other thing that different techniques help with is it actually increases engagement, right? And some of the questions, obviously, some of the problems I'm sure you have discussed is around people are not engaged, or they don't even maybe want to participate. And it's been a while, several years that I've been always using different techniques in my retrospective. And what was happening with my latest team I worked with is, initially when I was joining them, they really weren't super excited about retrospective. You can imagine a group of cloud engineers, very dedicated to their job. We don't have time to talk about all this fancy stuff about how to improve, right? And over time, because I was using different techniques, they got super excited for attending a retrospective. You know, it was a Friday, in the afternoon, we would have a retrospective. People were like, what are we going to do now? Like, what is the retrospective technique are we going to run, right? So that's a great way to engage your team and also make it more fun. So another benefit that we're seeing is it's more personalized approach to your team. Instead of just going over the same, you can choose a technique and a discussion topic in this technique that will focus the discussion on what really matters to your team. And that way you can actually remove the off-topic discussions and personal comments just because you're asking very specific questions about the matters that make sense to the team themselves, right? So you can choose the approach that will be more adaptable to your team's situation. And then you have some potential for metrics with certain techniques. If you're running, say, one technique today, and then you run the same technique 3 months from now you can start seeing some patterns, you can see some trends, and some specific techniques that I'm gonna cover a little bit later can actually help you gather some metrics, specifically see some trends, and this can give you this maybe one thing the team is looking for to see improvement, right? We often see people don't see anything coming out of a retrospective. If you are gathering metrics, now you can actually see the result of the work that is done in a retrospective, right? So you create a purpose for your retrospective and more tangible results. And obviously it's fun, right? And when it's fun, when teams are gathering in a retrospective to maybe do some more fun activities, at least during the brainstorming part, well, that's where they start working as a team, and that's where we're able to solve challenges in relation to the lack of trust in the team. And that's because they start acting as a unit rather than people discussing some personal problems they had with each other during the sprint, right? So that's where you can make it more engaging as well. But that's the general idea of why varying techniques can be very beneficial in any team. So I want to go back to the steps. So we talked about, I looked at the stages, right? The stages that we all know about. And I wanted to give you more specific steps of a retrospective that I found working really well. And these are the steps that you can use when you run any kind of technique. Any technique that you choose to run, how you can run it, right? So you start with reviewing the action items from previous retrospective. Now, I know some of the questions in the slide were around, well, people don't take ownership of their action items, right? Well, make sure that the focus of a retrospective is not to discuss problems, but the focus of a retrospective is action items. What have we done to improve, right? And number one is to review what have we agreed on in the last retrospective. How are we doing on that? And by starting any retrospective with this, you first of all remind the team what the purpose of a retrospective is, but you also hold them accountable for what they agreed on doing since the last retrospective. Now, secondly, you introduce the technique. That's very easy, right? You kind of create the premise and set up the stage around this technique. Then you run the technique, whatever you decide to do. Now, number 4, decide on action items, right? Because whatever you do, whatever technique you're running, whatever you're discussing, the focus is what are the potential improvements we're gonna do. So that's where we decide. And number 5 here, you need to have action drivers assigned. And it's not, oh, the whole team will work on it, but it's more about who is the person who will make sure that the team follows up on this action. It's not the person who is responsible for completing this action. The whole team is still accountable for the action, but this is the person who is responsible for reminding everyone that this is what we agreed on. Once again, it doesn't have to be the Scrum Master, right? And maybe even it shouldn't be the Scrum Master for only reason that we don't want the team to be dependent on the Scrum Master, right? So that's where we have this. And then we we close the retrospective by briefly covering what was discussed and thanking the team, right? If you look at this list of 6 action items, 3 of them are related to, I actually said 6 steps for the running a retrospective. 3 of them are about action items, right? That's where we put the focus back on what retrospective is about. It's about continuous improvement. So put enough focus on continuous improvement in your retrospective. I want to give you some of the examples of techniques that are very easy and accessible, and I can cover some of the points. That's from the other webinar. I will give you the links to the resources with the slides. So hot air balloon, that's something I talked about, sailboat, right? Starfish. Starfish is a great way for a more mature team to focus on action items, right? Because generally, if a team has been working with each other for long enough time, usually they know what the problems are and they already have some ideas around how to approach them, right? So starfish can be a good way to go if you want to get straight to the point, you know, if your team is ready for this. Squad health check, it's a Spotify technique. This is the one that can be very helpful in collecting metrics because it gives you an opportunity for everyone to vote on different areas such as code quality, communication with external teams, communication within the team, work-life balance, whatever you want. And the Spotify model has, I think, 15 different areas that they suggest, and you can obviously adapt them. And as everyone votes, you can calculate the vote, you can create a spider chart, you can then come back to this technique 3 months down the road and see where are you improving, right? And that's how you can actually focus on the areas that have the lowest scores and then work together with the team on this specific area and then double check, are we improving, right? So that's a good model for this. High performance tree is a great, more advanced technique, and it's not really a technique, but this is something you could definitely use as a retrospective technique, is where you talk about the fact that Scrum values create the foundation or the roots of our high performance tree. And when the Scrum values are followed and the behaviors are aligned with the Scrum values, when then the tree grows and the leaves are our characteristics of our team, right? So with strong values, our team becomes high performance team, and with that are some characteristics that are associated with that, such as team members trust each other, right? There is a healthy conflict, things like that. Those are characteristics. And as our team has all of those characteristics enacted within the team, well, then the tree, the high performance tree, is bearing fruit. And the fruit is the results of our team, the results of our team's work, right? And with this metaphor, you can come back to the team and say, well, how do we align with all these three elements? Are our roots, Scrum values, are they strong? Are we missing any team characteristics? Are leaves getting enough sunlight? And what about our fruit? Are there any fruits that have stale taste? Are we getting the results, right? So that's a good way to also run a retrospective. So those are some of the main topics I wanted to discuss here. And that's the overall what I have from my slides. So what I wanted to do before I go into the questions that are there is I wanted to give you just a minute, once again, just because we have so many people, just a minute to think about what are your key takeaways, right? I've been talking for 30 minutes now. So what are your key takeaways? What have you, what are you taking away from everything that I said? What is the one most important thing that comes to mind? So just write it down for yourself, and then I can go into the questions.
How do we type here?
Yeah, that's for yourself, just a personal reflection.
Oh, okay. So no need
Yeah.
to type in. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
No need to type. Okay, so let me see what questions we have on Slido. If you haven't had a question, so you can go ahead. I'm just going to go from the top. So one of the questions is how to deal with a situation when team is not taking ownership of any improvement action item discussed in the retrospective, trying to have everything on others, right? So once again, coming back to if there is an issue in retrospective, there is an issue somewhere else. Well, this is clearly something that might need to be taken care of outside of the retrospective. So I gave you some of the techniques around how you can run the retrospective to put more focus on creating ownership over improvements. But if this is a very specific situation, then you need to talk to this particular person, right? From what I can understand in this situation, right, it's more about one person not taking ownership. It means we see a lack of commitment to the team, lack of commitment to following Scrum. So how do you deal with this particular situation is there are various ways, and it depends on what kind of relationships you have with this person. But I would start with actually talking with them one-on-one and trying to understand why is this happening, right? Always first try to understand why before jumping into action. Did I answer this question? Just double checking.
Yeah, whoever has raised this question can see if it has been answered or not.
It says yes.
Yes.
Cool.
Someone's asking the link. So no one wants to have this as same problems team faces every sprint, lot of unplanned. Okay, so this is a different, lots of unplanned work between the sprint and management says everything is urgent, and then people don't want to have the retrospective because they face the same problems every sprint, right? So if the team faces the same problems every sprint, the importance of the retrospective becomes even higher, right? Once again, the retrospective, coming back to the purpose of the retrospective and talking to your team about why it's important. If the team is facing the same problems, now the question is, you need to identify whether those problems are something that your team wants to try to fix. And if not, once we decide that those problems are outside our team's control, you need to let go, right? You either decide we want to try to fix those problems and we commit to doing whatever it takes to trying to fix those problems, or we accept that those problems are completely outside of our team's control, so we stop talking about them and we talk about something else. If we cannot fix these problems, what else can be improved, right? Sometimes you just need to switch the focus, because it's not about fixing all the problems. Retrospective is not about that. Retrospective is about continuous improvement. If we can't fix the problems, how else can we improve? And this particular situation might be also a management thing, right? You might need to actually start working with management that is outside of the retrospective, right? If the problems are created on the management side, well, you need to start working with them. Any gamification ideas for retrospective meetings? Gamification ideas, well, I mean, while it's good to make it fun, right, and engaging in ways, don't get too much into gamification of a retrospective. It's still a working session, right? Do not take the focus completely away from the purpose of the retrospective. Gamification ideas, I can't think of anything specific. I would say there are different facilitation techniques that you can use, such as liberating structures, right? In the remote setting, you can use various tools where people can contribute at the same time, such as Miro or even Google Docs or even chat, right? Like it's more about asking people to participate more actively. Apart from that, it's more about, you know, if you're running a sailboat, let's say a sailboat technique, well, make it fun by creating some metaphors, by creating some imagery, right? To attract people to it, to start to help them think more creatively, right? Don't just draw a sailboat, right? The sailboat has 4 sides, right? It's I think it's an anchor, the current, the wind, and something else I forget now. But like you can make those more exciting, right? Instead of saying what has hindered us in the previous sprint, you can ask what are the how strong was the current that pushed our boat back, right? Like think about more of a how do you entice creativity in your team. How to deal with problems faced by the team, like managers disturbing during the sprint, or come up with extra tasks than committed. Well, a bit outside of retrospective specifically, but yeah, once again, I'm coming back to the previous thing that I talked about. You need to start working with managers and coming back to them, trying to help them understand why it's important to let your team work for two weeks. And also talking to them about, well, it's only 2 weeks, right? If something needs to be done, the longest amount of time you're going to be waiting is 2 weeks. It's not that long, right? And I say 2 weeks just because most of the sprints are 2 weeks. You might have a different sprint situation. But yeah, it's just a way to, how do you build relationships with your management, and how do you help them understand the rules and boundaries of Scrum, and how do you also help them get that important work done, right? It's not only about just protecting the team, close the door and never let anyone talk to your team, but it's about how do you also get things done, right? Well, instead of the managers coming directly to the team, why don't you connect them more to the product owner, right? How do you create the link between the product owner and the new requests coming in? Maybe they don't have the right way to insert new work into the product backlog. Well, think about how you can facilitate this, right? That can be also a way to go. I'm thinking maybe I should just actually share it. Can you see my screen, or is it only sharing the previous screen?
We can see the technique examples.
Okay, so I think I need to just share my screen. Okay, now you should be seeing the questions as well.
That's good.
Yes, we can see the questions.
So, what technique would be beneficial if the team is working from home rather than from the office? I believe any technique can be actually turned into virtual setting. It's more about how do you create the engagement in the virtual setting. And you can use the tools. You don't have to use external tools. I know that some companies might have restrictions into what tools you can use. Like Mural is a great tool to use because people can add their ideas right here by creating sticky notes, right? There is Miro, there is Zenboard, Zeitboard. There are many, many different tools that you can use. You don't have to use them specifically, right? So even if you are running a retrospective, you can split the brainstorming sessions from, for example, outside of the retrospective, and then ask people to send you the notes, right? And then you can prepare a slide deck or a board that you can then share with your team and work together around it. Like that's kind of where it's not tools dependent. There are a couple of questions that are in the Zoom chat. I don't know if they were added here, just to make sure that people who added them into this in Zoom chat.
Yeah, I think that will be helpful if people can add the questions in the Slido link. I'll just share it again in case people have lost it somewhere.
Yeah. Right from the office. Double checking that no other questions were kind of upvoted. Let me answer maybe one more question.
Sure.
To make sure. Okay. Okay, that's an interesting question. Let's actually, let me cover this one. Is it good to highlight if the Scrum team member is not performing and because of him, her stories are getting rolled over? So as a Scrum Master, you're there to help the team uncover problems, right? Think of it that way, but you're not there to tell them how to do that exactly or what to do to uncover or solve problems. So in this situation, if you're the only one who sees that and thinks it's an issue, you need to let your team get to the point where they highlighted themselves, you know, and if you think that this is something that might put the team in the risk of this preventing the team from really delivering something highly important, if it's very high, the risk of this happening, then you might want to take action through talking to this team member, right, and trying to figure out what's going on. I wouldn't highlight it at a general setting with everyone, right? Saying, by the way, John, I've noticed that you haven't been pulling your weight. Right? That's not the first step, right? But it's about thinking if the risk is too high for your team, if the failure that potentially might happen has the cost that is too high, then you might want to take an action. If the team is working in their normal and maybe you need to let them fail so that they can figure out it on their own. Because at the end of the day, they need to self-organize to tell each other that this is a problem and to highlight it themselves. If you tell them this is the problem, you might end up having people who do not think it's a problem, and just because it wasn't them who actually got to figuring it out. I hope I'm making sense, but that's trying to kind of cover this situation from both what is your role as a Scrum Master and how you can approach this problem. Yeah. I also wanted to, I think I'm gonna finish with the question. Obviously, I know there is many more questions, but I can't answer all of them. But what I wanted to talk to you about quickly is that I have, if you liked what you see, I have a workshop coming up next week, and it is about mastering retrospectives, and it's also about how to create the culture in your organization to support Scrum and to support great retrospectives. So if you sign up today just because you are on this webinar, I would like to give you a 20% discount that it will be the whole day today, end of day, my time, so it's 12 p.m. here. And I'd love to see you there. It's a great webinar or workshop where I talk about different techniques and different ways to actually solve a lot of the problems you might be seeing, not only within the retrospective, but generally as an organization and a team on a cultural level. We talk a lot about values. We talk a lot about different tools and techniques. Very practical workshop that is focused on discussions rather than just presentation. And if you sign up, you also get an electronic copy of my book, Retrospectives, a Scrum Master's Guide, where I have 20 different techniques explained in detail with instructions, speaking cues, and all that. So if you're interested, I would love to see you there. You can sign up at scrummaster.com, and it's happening on Monday through Thursday for 1.5 hours. We meet every day for this workshop, and it's friendly for almost every time zone. So here you go. I also have other additional resources on my website. There are free for download or a lot of different blog posts. So on scrummaster.com, you can find a lot of additional resources for retrospectives or Scrum Master, how you can help your team be more efficient, and how you can help your team be more productive and happy. So I have a lot of resources there that you can find on my blog via articles and videos. So there you go. I think that's it for me, and I'm even on time. I'm surprised.
Very nice, actually. I think it was a fantastic webinar. Thank you so much, Daria, for coming over here and sharing your knowledge. I think most of the things have been useful for the people over here. We look forward for another session for you in coming future. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the participants for great questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daria. Thank you.
Thanks, Daria. Thanks, Shrikant.
Thank you, Daria.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Shrikant, for organizing this.
Thanks, Shrikant.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Everyone. Thanks, Daria. Oh.
Shrikant will be sharing the information via email with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share.
Okay. So what I'll do, I need to export it. So let me export the pages.
I like the
from
idea
there.
of using Mural for the back actually. Is the first-
I use it all the time for everything now, to be honest.
Very nice actually. I saw it for the first time. Thank you.
So yeah, I'll export it and I'll send it to you shortly so that you can share it with everyone. And I have also the links that I mentioned that I need to include actually in the slide with techniques right here. So I'm gonna add the links so that people can actually go and look up the information on these techniques.
That will be
And yeah, there you go. Cool. I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, Daria.
Thank you.
Ending this conversation.